everyone, this is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast, brought to you by Historical Conquest. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about something very important. Let me just put this out there first. I apologize for the way I'm dressed. This is how I normally look on a very cold day and when I'm not usually at work. I'll be in a hoodie, being in a hat. It's what I like. Also, during times with work, I'd be in a button-down, something like that, and be a little bit more presentable. Well, today, because it's the holiday week of President's Day, and also it's freezing cold outside. It is frigid. Now, right now, it's only like 10 degrees. But come Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it's supposed to be in the negatives, -7, and feeling like -18. So, for this reason, I'm bundled up. Right now, I've got my heater on my side, because I'm in my basement. I'm in my office at home. I have my hoodie on, hat on. Well, actually, I just went on a date with my son. We cleaned up the snow off our driveway. Then we went out for a date as a thank you to him. And now we're back for this podcast. So I apologize for how they look, and it will probably happen again. But let's get into something that's very exciting. This is what you're here for. We're going to be talking about the American government, the United States government, and how it all started. Now, on Monday, we talked about George Washington being elected and how the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch were created. Now let's go a little bit deeper, just a little bit deeper into who is actually running the country through the executive branch, George Washington's office. These are his secretaries and the departments underneath him. So the president is the one that actually controls all of the departments. Department of Education. These are ones right now. Let's go back. During his time, there was 3 of them. Treasury, Secretary of State, and War Department. Now, the Department of the Treasury was all about getting money for the country, being able to run. That's the financial side. The state was in charge of foreign relations, and war was based on exactly what it says. War. Yeah, so that's right. So now we're into, at this point, 2025, we have, and this is going off just memory, we have the HHS, which is Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, Department of, go on and on and on and on and on. There is so many different departments, but they're under one person. One person, they all are obligated to report back and only do what the president's mission is. That is actually their department. Otherwise, they would not be a department based on the cabinet created by the government. And you're like, wait. These are people in departments that are supposed to be working for the Congress. No. These are departments under the executive branch. The legislative branch, again, creates laws. They can actually create departments for the executive branch, but they are not in control of those departments. And those departments do not control themselves. They're all under the executive branch. So you have the executive, you have George Washington, you have his cabinet, which is basically the secretaries of all these different departments. Again, during George Washington times, there was 3 different cabinets: Treasury, War Department, State. Now there's at least a dozen departments and a lot of sub-departments, such as like the Department of Justice. It has the FBI. It has the CIA. Sorry, no, that's intelligence. It has a whole bunch of them. So I can't even think of all the ones that they have. But something like HHS, it has the CDC. It has HHS. It has, wow, I'm really blanking at these times. Okay, I actually have a drawing of it. Give me 1 second. I'll bring this up. Okay, so here it is. You have the federal government, which has the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. We went over this last week. under the legislative branch, it has Congress, which is the House of Representatives, and the Senate. That is all. That is the only thing that they control. They control creating the laws and creating the departments and even appointing some of the people, but they do not actually control the departments in Washington. You have the judicial, which controls the SCOTUS. SCOTUS is over the circuit courts, which is over the district courts. But that's it. And now down here it actually shows that there's a little bit of smaller departments when it comes to that. But that's it. And over here you have the legislative branch. It actually does have some helping departments, which is CBO, which is the Congressional Budget Office. You have the GAO, which is the General Accounting Office. Again, it's the legislative branch that's over all the finances. They appropriate money to go to the executive branch to be able to fulfill, to execute the laws that they put in place. You have the GPO, which is the Government Publishing Office, publishes their information. You have the LOC, which is the Library of Congress. It stores that information. And you have the, let's see. Yeah, sorry. Very, very important. Very, very important. The U.S. Botanical Gardens. Yes. And the architect of the Capitol. That's all that the legislative has power over. So if you have people that are going over, this is a constitutional crisis that's happening today under Trump, it's actually not true. They do not, and they are trying to control the departments. They can't control them. It's not under their branch. Checks and balances. So the executive branch cannot make laws. Even all the departments, they cannot make laws. There are no laws that they are actually able to make. Now, an executive officer, such as Trump, can do executive orders, EOs. EOs, or executive orders, are basically laws that are put into place until the legislature can deal with them. Now, at the same time, the Justice Department, or sorry, not Justice Department, the judicial branch can override those executive orders if need be, which is why a lot of those cases are, a lot of the suits, the lawsuits that are going on, are being sent to the courts. So anyone that wants to say Trump can't cut the budget at these departments, actually he can. Because all the money that's been appropriate, there is nothing in the law that says he has to use exactly this amount for this department. What it does say is, this is how much that department gets under the purview of the, or under the management of the executive branch. He can use as much or as little as that. Now, interesting enough, now this is this was actually happening during Bill Clinton. He did nearly the same thing that Trump is doing, and also like 3 other presidents before him. They were all trying to be fiscally responsible and were cleaning house. Reagan was one of those. 2 others besides them. And it was both those that are in the Democrat side and the Republican side. So everything that's happening right now, it's under the purview of the executive branch. All of these departments, DOD, HHS, Treasury, DOE, Department of Energy, State, Department of Labor, Department of Homeland Security, you have Department of Commerce, Department of Education, the VA, Department of Veteran Affairs. So all those that came back from war, soldiers, this is for them. HUD, U.S. House and Urban Development, DOT, Department of Transportation, USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the DOI, which is Department of Interior. Basically the major national parks that are around, and any kind of other land that the government owns. And then they have basically other smaller offices that are in there, much like the legislature and the judicial has. There's smaller offices that are not full departments. But anyways, so this is very interesting, because this is based off the precedent that was put together by who? By George Washington. So anything that's being done today was done by predecessors. So like EOs, yeah, George, you've got Donald Trump writing all his EOs, but you have no idea how many EOs were written by Bill Clinton, hundreds, Obama, hundreds, Even Joe Biden, hundreds. So nothing that Trump is doing is outside the purview of what's already been done. It's under the precedent that was set before him. And who's the one that actually set the original precedent, which was not as complicated as it now? It's George Washington. Now, let's go back to George Washington and his cabinet. Again, this is what we're going to be talking about today, and this is what's very much important right now. So, there were no guidelines for him. There was no guidebook. There's nobody that could have actually told him how it was done in the past because it's never been done before. So Washington did something revolutionary, completely different than everyone else. He created his first presidential cabinet. So like you see over here, there is a cabinet over every one of these departments. Whether it's Homeland Security, you have, Health and Human Services. That is RFK Jr. If you have Treasury, that is, I can't remember his name. Department of Education, of Energy, don't remember. Department of State, that's Marco Rubio. Department of Labor, that one's not chosen yet. Well, there's someone going for the hearings this week, but not chosen yet. Department of Justice, that is actually right here, the AG. The Attorney General is Pam Bondi. And you've got all these different departments. There will be someone to be over each of those, but under the purview of the Attorney General. You have the Department of Homeland Security, that is Governor Nome from South Dakota, and so forth. So just like they had that, which is right now, again, we had 3 cabinets back in the time of Washington. So he was able to do something that brand new, and that was starting up his own cabinet. So he set the precedent. Washington did something totally different than what's been done in like every country out there, which is why there was never any guidelines or anything he could go back on to figure out how to get this to work. So why did he need a cabinet? We talked about this on Monday. So let's go back to a story well known. It's actually in the Bible, so if you don't believe in the Bible, that's okay. It's still a good story. It tells a really good lesson. So there's this man named Moses, and he's out in the wilderness, and he's told that he needs to govern the people of Israel, the Jews that came out of, or the Hebrews that came out of Egypt. So he's there as the one judge over the millions of people that are there. Well, his father-in-law came up to him and said, "You are killing yourself. You need to stop doing this." He's like, "How do I stop? I've been mandated to do this." No, don't work harder. Think harder. Think smart. Don't do all this work. Delegate. Wait, delegate. Okay, tell me more. So you have yourself. You can't judge all these people. So get people over each of the tribes. There's 12 tribes of Israel. Put a person over each of those tribes. Let them be the judge of that. Okay, great. But that's going to be a lot of people for just that one person also. Great. Delegate under them 1 or 2 other people to judge, and then that can go to the person over the tribe, and then if it doesn't get solved there, then it can come to you. Or maybe it can come to another body and then come to you. You have to delegate so you don't kill yourself doing this. Moses is like, "That's genius." Washington says, "That's amazing. That's genius." So the U.S. was faced with a massive challenge. Multiple challenges. We talked about this also last week. A weak economy. Foreign nations, the relationships with them. Division between those who wanted a strong government versus those that feared one, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And I don't know as much as feared, but they did not want a all-powerful central government. They wanted people to have the rights and states over those rights, which is why we're going to get into the Bill of Rights next week. Washington knew he couldn't lead all this by himself, but he needed experts to run different parts of the government. So let's go into who were the main 4 starting cabinet members. Yes, I said 4. Remember, I said there was only 3 main departments. So let's go over them. Secretary of State. Now, the Secretary of State is over basically foreign relations. That was none other than Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson the author of the Declaration of Independence. So he didn't exactly have the best relationship with Britain, because he had actually said, we're leaving you and you can't say anything about it now. So he was put over all foreign affairs. He believed in limited government. He's actually one of, like I said, there was a balance of anti-federalists and federalists in here, and he was an anti-federalist. He wanted limited government in favor of states' powers over federal powers. Now, what about the Secretary of the Treasury? Now, you've heard his name before, maybe in a musical or maybe somewhere else. His name was Alexander Hamilton. Former aide to Washington during the American Revolution, he was put in charge of the nation's finances. Whether it's spending or it's revenue. Revenue or spending, he was in charge of it. He kept track of the books and how much money was coming in and how much was leaving the federal government. So Hamilton was, he wanted a strong centralized government. So you had, again, Jefferson, who was an anti-federalist, and Hamilton, who was a federalist. He also believed in a national bank. And so he actually started up a national bank and also manufacturing-based economy. He wanted the United States to build to create goods instead of just taking ones in from trade. So he wanted to start manufacturing in the country as well. Very expensive, but he's over the finances of the country. Now, his views clashed with Jefferson. They were very much butting heads during this time, which also led to the first major political rivalry in history. Alexander Hamilton, who actually backed John Adams, and Jefferson, and in the first non-Washington election, they would go head-to-head. We're going to get back to that later on. Okay, so who was the third cabinet member? Secretary of War. Have you ever heard of a place called Fort Knox? Yes, you have. If you know anything about gold, that's where the gold is supposedly stored. It's a military base. Well, Henry Knox, which is what it was, the name is based off of, was a trusted military leader and oversaw all national defense. So foreign relationships was the Department of State. Department of War was over war against others. And the Secretary of War was the one that was basically over national defense when George Washington told Britain and France, we're not getting becoming part of your war. So that's why Knox was there for defense, national defense, more than offense, more than attacking others. So at this time, the U.S. had a standing army, had no standing army. They just had small militias. Okay, fourth cabinet member. Now remember, I said there was three departments. State, Treasury, and War. So who is the last one? It's called the Attorney General. So this is the one that worked with the judiciary branch. Again, Vice President worked with the legislature, was over the House and the Senate. The department, or the Attorney General, was working with the courts. Now, he didn't control anything that the courts did, but he worked between them, especially if there was disputes on what the executive branch could do. He was there to go do that. That was Edmund Randolph. He was Washington's legal advisor and helped interpret laws for the president. Now, let's talk about this rivalry. It was Jefferson and Hamilton. So while the cabinet worked together, Jefferson and Hamilton constantly disagreed. I mean, again, like I said, butting heads. They had totally different directions that they want the government to go into. This led to the formation of the Americans' first political parties. The Federalists, led by Hamilton, and the Democratic Republicans, which was Jefferson. They wanted states' rights. Hamilton and the Federalists wanted strong central government. So two different parties. Now, George Washington worked very well with both sides because he had respect from both sides. So despite their differences, Washington balanced their viewpoints. That's why he gave some of them one department and others the other department and made it all work. Now, why does the cabinets matter? Why do these individual groups, departments matter? And the cabinet members are secretaries of defense, secretary of HHS, those type of things. Washington's cabinet set the precedent for every future president. Every administration since then has relied on key advisors. So these are not people just to take orders. They're there to advise the president, which is exactly what's happening. You can see it with Trump. They're there to advise the president. Now, the president has a mission of, let's say, cut the waste. Great. He tells his secretary of Treasury that, or secretary of Labor, or secretary of HHS. They're going to go in, find the places that need to be cut, and they'll feed it back to the president. Now, also, under Obama's rule, let me bring this picture back up. There was another department that was actually created. Oh, I can close it down. There was another department that was created, and that one was for government efficiency. Wait a minute, Department of Government Efficiencies. He had a Doge? Actually, he did. It was more for digitalizing the government, making things more efficient by digitizing all the information. Well, Trump basically did the same thing with Doge. But back in the time of George Washington, there was none. So Musk is over Doge, which was created by Obama, Barack Obama. But the funny thing is, it was called differently. So now it's called Doge because it's a funny little meme coin that's out there in cryptocurrency. But it's also the fact that it actually represents Department of Government Efficiency. Doge. Perfect. Okay. So let's go into the next part. The Judiciary Act. So we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, judicial. This is also very important. The Judicial Act actually basically told the courts how they were to operate. So with the executive branch taking shape, the next challenge was to go after SCOTUS and all the courts underneath them. But it didn't explain, so the Constitution, it basically said what the Supreme Court was for, but didn't tell it all its rules. Didn't tell it what it was supposed to do. Didn't tell it how it interacted with the lower courts. So that is where the Judiciary Act of 1789 comes in. This law, passed by the first Congress, created an entire federal court system. The same court system we use today. So why was it needed? Okay, let's go. There's 2 points I want to make. Why it was needed. So before this act, each state had their own court system. They didn't always drive. There was no clear way of resolving disputes between states, and also to interpret federal laws. So without that, you wouldn't know what the Constitution meant. Without that, you wouldn't know what a law from the legislative branch meant. So they had to figure this out. So the founders didn't want Congress or the president deciding legal matters. It was not their purview. Now, some of them were lawyers, but not all of them. And it's not about the democratic rule over this. You can't just vote on all of the different things and say, oh yeah, this is what this means and this is what this means. This is why they needed a judicial branch. This also means the judicial branch had to be the only one that was not elected. It was chosen, it was passed by the Senate to create SCOTUS, but they were all appointed. All judicial judges in these areas were all controlled by what? What was it controlled by? A joint management of both executive and legislative. The executive branch, they chose the judge. The legislative, they would debate about them and then accept or reject them from the president. Same thing as the department heads, the secretaries of state and such. They're all reviewed basically by the Senate. So that's why this whole process is so important. This is why the Judiciary Act was so important. Okay. They also didn't want, the founders at least, didn't want Congress or the president to set these up, to set a precedent in here. So this is why they had to make that side, the judiciary branch, so much more important and stronger. Wanted to basically make it an independent judicial branch. Okay, so let's go into what the Judicial Act was in 1789. Basically created 3 tiers of court system. The SCOTUS, this is exactly what we had back then and we still have here. Though things have changed a little bit, it's nearly the same. Supreme Court. The Judiciary Act officially set up the Supreme Court with 6 judges, later expanded to 9. Now again, if you're going to judge, you have to have an odd number of judges. So it was 6 judges plus John Jay, who was the first chief judge. So there's 7. And he was basically the deciding factor, deciding vote if there was a equal vote on both sides. Okay, so then you have the circuit courts. So the one underneath, Circuit Court of Appeals. This is, again, an appeals court. You have 3 circuit courts. They were created, and they were to handle basically the appeals from states' courts. So, say Missouri has a certain case that they don't agree, they charge someone in or charge a group in. All of a sudden, this group has the ability to appeal to the circuit courts. Now, the circuit courts can actually say, no, we're not taking it, or shoot it down to a district court and say, oh, you're gonna be able to run this one. Or it sends that up to the Supreme Court and says, okay, we've agreed that it should be this way. These people don't agree. They're appealing it. So SCOTUS, what do you think? Okay, so that is the circuit courts. And then there's district courts. So each state had at least one district court which handled federal crimes and lawsuits. So federal crimes, something like having marijuana is literally still a federal crime. It's not been let go. Though they've reduced the type of drug marijuana is, it is still a federal crime. And also, let's say that there's a lawsuit that's going on that's a federal lawsuit. We're being sued by a state. Well, this is something that the Attorney General would go in there and fight for the executive branch, while that state would fight for the state side. And that's how those 3 tiers: Supreme Court, Circuit Court, District Courts. So here's an interesting one. What about the first Supreme Court justices? So Washington appointed the first justice. He was John Jay. He was the Chief Justice. Then the earlier courts wasn't as powerful as it is today. Its biggest role was basically settling disputes between states and also the federal lawsuits. Those are basically the 2 things that it does. Now it does a lot more than that. Basically has anything that where you need to clarify the Supreme Court. So later in 1803, the Supreme Court would gain more power through what's called Marbury versus Madison. And this is also where judicial review came in. So this is where their power started to expand. The Judiciary Act basically impacted the American law to ensure that the U.S. had a fair and organized court system. States' laws, district court, which is overall each of the states, circuit court of appeals, and then up to the Supreme Court. And those are the 9 non-elected and no term limited justices. That's how we've always run it. George Washington and all the predecessors are the ones that set this up. We're just following what they set up. So let's wrap this up a little bit. We're coming to the end. Let me see. I'm just checking my time. Okay. Yeah. Perfectly on time. Look at that. So let's wrap this up. Let's go through some of the things that we talked about today. In 1789, the U.S. government was just basically a blueprint. This is what we hope to build. This is what we want to build. But in the blueprints, it doesn't tell you all of the different facts that need to be known. It definitely doesn't tell you about the environment. It definitely doesn't tell you about how people are going to use those places. It gives you the best understanding of what it says. So it's a blueprint. And then when the executive branch comes in, they figure out everything else. When the legislative branch comes in, they figure everything else in their department. Same with the judicial branch. So the executive branch, so the executive branch was built with Washington when he was first elected, and then all the departments were based on the cabinet members, who he basically delegated his responsibilities to, but still managed them. So if you delegate, some say that Biden basically delegated it to these cabinet members, and then he wasn't completely cognitively there. Was he? I'm not quite sure. But as far as, it doesn't matter if you listen to, read things from the right or from the left, they all say it, that he was not the president for a long time, that there was other people that were basically controlling it, that he delegated his functions to these other groups. And like I said, Washington delegated it too, but Washington managed those people. The question is, was Biden cognitively available to manage those people as well? We don't know. We never will know. We can have assumptions on it, but we still will never know. So again, George Washington is the one that created his cabinet. He managed them, but delegated a lot of his responsibilities as the executive branch to each of them. There is a whole country to manage. So very smart. It's only now that we have, over a dozen different departments that we have to actually have different heads to. Okay, then the judiciary branch, the judges, the courts, judicial judges. So the judicial branch was organized to ensure laws would be interpreted fairly between the states and the federal government and, say, states or others, so federal lawsuits. They'll go through the appeals, and then they go to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court allows it, they get a choice. So these are some of the earliest challenges that the U.S. government had. How do we get this done? So let me give you an active question for you to think about as we end. Okay? What do you think was Washington's most important cabinet appointment? Remember the last time, on Monday, I asked you, what was his major challenge or decision that had to be made as the president? Now, what was Washington's most important cabinet appointment? Two different questions. I want to hear what you have to say for the first one. Put it in the comments below. I would like to know what you have to say about the cabinet pick. Which one was more important? Let's go over it. Okay, so there's the one that worked with the judicial branch. That was the Attorney General. There was the Department of War. So that was, let me go back. That was, no. There we go. Okay. Secretary of War was Henry Knox. That's right. How did I forget that? Fort Knox. So Secretary of War, Fort Knox, Henry Knox. Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. You know him. And then there's the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so now that we know those, which was the most important to be chosen? And you know what? I've been talking about all these ones. What is something that we have today that would be nice for George Washington to be able to have as well? So 2 questions for you. Please put them in the comments below. Love to hear what you have to say. Be the first one after this video. So thanks for joining me today and going deeper into Washington's cabinet and the Judiciary Act of 1789. Be sure to be here next time as we explore Alexander Hamilton's financial plans, as we talk about the Bill of Rights, as we talk about all these different things. Stay tuned. And as always, until then, stay curious and keep uncovering history. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care, y'all. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.